Why China's climate policy matters to us all. China's carbon emissions are vast and growing, dwarfing those of other countries. Experts agree that without big reductions in China's emissions, the world cannot win the fight against climate change. China's President Xi Jinping has said his country will aim for its emissions to reach the highest point before 2030 and for carbon neutrality to be achieved by 2060. President Xi has not said how China will achieve this extremely ambitious goal. Explosive growth. While all countries face problems getting their emissions down, China is facing the biggest challenge. China's per person emissions are about half those of the US, but its huge 1.4 billion population and explosive economic growth have pushed it way ahead of any other country in its overall emissions. China became the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide in 2006 and is now responsible for more than a quarter of the world's overall greenhouse gas emission. Shift from coal. Getting China's emission down is achievable according to many experts but will require a radical shift. Coal has been the country's main source of energy for decades and its use is increasing. President Xi says China will phase down coal use from 2026, but the announcement was criticized by some governments and campaigners for not going far enough. Researchers at Xinjiang University in Beijing say China will need to stop using coal entirely for generating electricity by 2050 to be replaced by nuclear and renewable energy production. But far from shutting down coal-fired power stations, China is currently building new ones at more than 60 locations across the country, with many sites having more than one plant. New stations are usually active for 30 to 40 years, so China will need to reduce the capacity of newer plants as well as close old ones if it is to bring emissions down, says researchers Philippe Case of the Institute of Environment and Climate Science in Paris. It may be possible to retrofit some to capture emissions, but the technology to do so at a scale is still developing and many plants will have to be written off after minimal use. China argues it has right to do what Western countries have done in the past, releasing carbon dioxide in the process of developing its economy and reducing poverty. It has also financed coal-fired power stations outside China through its Belt and Road Initiative, though it does not appear to be scaling back new investment. But China is switching to green energy. Tsinghua University researchers say 90% of power should come from nuclear and renewables by 2050. In moving towards that goal, China leads the manufacture of green technology such as solar panels and large-scale batteries may be a big help. China first embraced green technologies as a means to tackle air pollution, a serious problem for many cities. But the government also believes they have enormous economic potential, providing jobs and income for millions of Chinese as well as reducing China's dependence on foreign oil and gas. China is already leading the global energy transition, says Yu Ke of the Overseas Development Institute. One of the reasons we are able to deploy cheaper and cheaper green technology in China. China generates more solar power than any other country. That might not be so impressive given China's enormous population, but it is a sign of where the country is heading. China's wind power installations were more than triple those of any other country in 2020. China says the proportion of its energy generated from non-fossil fuel sources should be 25% by 2030, and it is expected by many observers to hit the target early. Electric drive. China ranks 7th in the world for its percentage of car sales that are electric, but given its huge size, China makes and buys more electric cars than any other country by a considerable margin. About 1 in 20 cars bought in China is electric power. Working out by how much the shift to electric vehicles reduces emission is not straightforward, particularly when taking into account manufacturing and charging sources. But studies suggest that the emissions over the lifetime of electric vehicles are typically below those of petrol and diesel equivalents. This matters because transport is responsible for around a quarter of carbon emissions from fuel combustion, and with road vehicles being the largest emitters. China will also by 2025 be producing batteries with double the capacity of those produced by the rest of the world combined. Observers say they will enable the storage and release of energy from renewable sources on a previous impossible scale. China's land is getting greener. Getting to net zero greenhouse gas emission doesn't mean that China will stop producing emission. It means China will cut emissions as much as possible and absorb what left through a combination of different approaches. Increasing the area of land covered in vegetation will help as plants is absorb carbon dioxide. Here again, there is encouraging news. China is getting greener at a faster rate than any other country, largely as a result of forestry program designed to reduce soil erosion and pollution. It is also part of a result of replanting fields to produce more than one harvest per year, which keeps land covered in vegetation for longer. What next? The world needs China to succeed. Unless China decarbonizes, we are not going to beat climate change, says Professor David Teffield of the Lancaster Environment Center. China has some big advantage, particularly in capacity to stick to long-term strategies and mobilize large-scale investment. The Chinese authorities are facing a colossal task. What happens next could hardly be more important. Thank you.